All right, we are ready for class. And so glad that you're here. Our numbers were a little bit down. We've got, I think it's 42 people down in Alabama at a youth rally. And you may watch some of the videos. They'll come out either today or tomorrow. This is a youth rally that has around 7,000 people who go. And it's one of those atrium hotels, and they all have a room in the center, and they start singing. And it is just absolutely beautiful. And so I think it's one of the favorite youth trips that our kids take. But we're missing a lot of people. And that used to aggravate me as a preacher, missing all those folks, because I always want to have a lot of people at church. But now that I look at it, I'm glad that they're somewhere, with spiritual formation, helping them to grow as a Christian, helping them to produce a lot of interactive relationships with one another. So it's a good thing. It's a blessed thing. Now, if you got our notes, we're on the back side of this page. We're talking about uncomfortable commitment and what it is that God expects from you as a member of His church. A lot of times as a church, we accept breadcrumbs. And what I mean by that, somebody is baptized, and they come out of the water, and the question is, well, now what? So what does a person need to do when they're baptized? Well, come to church, right? But what is expected of a member of the church? And that's kind of what we're looking at. If you remember on the front side of the page, we talked about how the church is, there's an analogy in Ephesians 5:25 through 33 about husbands, love your wives as Christ loved the church. And it talks about wives with husbands. The husband should nourish his wife, should cherish his wife, should take care of his wife, should sacrifice himself for his wife. And Paul here is saying, I'm talking about the church and Jesus using marriage to give you a sense of what's going on. And so as you and I look at that, we think about how today that analogy may not work so well with us, because guess what people aren't doing anymore? They're not getting married, or at least they're waiting till much later in life. And a good number of people nowadays live together before marriage. A good number of people never even get that sheet of paper. They just live together forever. And beyond that, even those who do get the sheet of paper, the definition of what a wife does and the role of a husband has transitioned and changed in so many ways. Sometimes we don't fully understand that. And so it's important for us to read Ephesians 5 to see not only the nature of marriage, but also the nature of Jesus and the church. So now we're on this back side here. And a fellow gave a video years ago. It started on YouTube. It started on TikTok, ended up on YouTube and other things. And he says, I am spiritual without being religious. And he goes through and he talks about how the church has become corrupt, and he doesn't appreciate the church anymore. The church seems to be man-made. At least his view of the church is it's man-made. And he says, I'm just spiritual. I let God work through me. I worship Him every day as I go through different things. But I'm not going to let a church control who I am. And a lot of people will say that to us even today. I am spiritual, but not religious. And what they mean by that, they've taken that word religion and made it into a bad word, into, if you're religious, that means you don't care about Jesus. But John 1:27 says what? Pure and undefiled religion is this: to care for orphans and widows in their distress and keep yourself unspotted from the world. So we are a religion. And that idea of being religious means our relationship we have with God. So if you say, I follow Jesus, but I don't like the church, you're saying, hey, I love the head and not the body. And imagine how strange that would be if you're walking around with a head without a body and saying, this is my best buddy. All right? First of all, you call the police. Okay? But, that's not how it works. Or, hey, I like you, but if you come over the house or if we go to a party, you're not allowed to bring your wife because I don't like who you chose to be married to. That's going to cause some issues, isn't it? Right? That's going to cause some problems which are there. And so, you keep going through there, you have a founder without a movement. You cannot have Christ without the church. They are attached. They are together. And the church is the expression or the embodiment of our relationship we have with Jesus. In Acts chapter 2, verse 47, when you get saved and enter into Christ, what happens to you? You're added to what? You're added to the church. The Lord added to the church daily those who are being saved. So you can't be saved and not be in a church. You can't have a relationship with Jesus and not be a part of fellow believers. Now, this is just supposition, opinion. But why do you think people want to follow Jesus and not the church? Why do you think people want to have a relationship with Jesus, but they say, I am spiritual but not religious. I don't want to have anything to do with church. Why do you think that? Huh? Okay, the rules, the everyday life, the commitment. Yeah. What you got, Mike? Okay, yeah. Religion without the commitment. And here we go right back to what our entire society looks like. Why are kids, I say kids, am I that old? Why are kids no longer getting married? Commitment.
But also, it's not like it was when we were younger, growing up with the solid family unit, whether our parents got along or not. They showed us that you stuck it out. You made your bed, you lie in it now, you do the work for it. Nobody wants to work towards anything anymore, so why work at a relationship?
Right, right.
When you don't really have to, nobody's making you do it.
Right. Yeah, what she just said is the whole world now is disposable. Back a generation, 2 generations, maybe 3 generations ago, you got married at an ungodly age, like 14, 15, 16, 17. And I meet these people who have been married 70 years. I'll say, how'd you meet? Well, we met one day and we got married a week later. You know, and people say that, and then they are married forever, 60, 70 years, right? Because back then, when you got married, you had to stay married, right? And I'm not saying anything to promote abuse that may happen or neglect that may happen, but back in that day, you figured it out. You continued to stay married to this person. Now in the modern world, okay, you now see people who, they trade spouses more than they trade cars. You know, hey, this one's got 100,000 miles on it. It's time to go get a new model, right? Or you just, it's disposable. If it's broken, don't get it fixed. If it's broken, give it up. Go find yourself a new one. And work that one until that one's broken. In the old days, they really, really worked on it. Now, you bring that back to our relationship with church. A lot of people say, church is broken. I know a hypocrite or two there. There's a lot of commitment there. And I really want to have a relationship with Jesus where I get to call him Savior, but I really don't want to call him Lord. He's not going to be the master of my life, but he is going to save me. He's going to be the one who, when things go bad, I push the red button, the cross in the sky appears, and here comes Jesus, and he rescues me and brings me to a good place, and then he goes back into his cave, and I do what I want until the next time that I need him, just like Batman. And for a lot of us, that's what we see as people's relationship, and this idea of daily commitment, this idea of weekly commitment, this idea of trying to place myself in a body of imperfect believers, a body of Christians who sometimes it's not going to be the way I want it to be. Sometimes I'm not going to sit by the person I want to sit by. That commitment is something which we don't see or have very much. Now, Jesus wants us in a local congregation because that's where we are put to be. The old illustration. You got a fire of coals, you pull one out. What happens to that coal when he's left alone? It goes cold, right? When you have several of them feeding off one another, glowing together, working together, the heat lasts much, much longer. You and I, as a Christian, if you pull us away from a body of believers, when you find yourself not being there on Sunday night, Wednesday night, not being there every Sunday, when you find yourself not giving or not singing or not praying, you're detached, and what's going to happen is you're going to begin to lose that glow. You're going to lose that spiritual fervor that is there. And that's why Hebrews 10, 24 and 25, stir one another up. Encourage one another up as you see that day approaching. That's what we've got to do as Christians. Not forsake the assembling, but encourage one another so very much. Now, going back to what we just talked about, post-consumer Christianity. All right. I know a lot of us, brethren, go to the Chinese place after church. And you go to the Chinese place, I like it because they have a buffet. And I see the broccoli, and I observe the Passover. All right? And I see some meat which I cannot identify, and I'm afraid it might be kitty cat. I observe the Passover. But then the egg rolls come, life is good, right? And then, Kung Pao chicken or General Tso or whoever that was over in China that nobody ever has any idea who it was, because General Tso was an invention in New Jersey about 50 years ago, 100 years ago. I like that, and so I take that, all right? That's the reason we like buffets. You skip some stuff and you get the good stuff, and everybody's happy because that's what you're supposed to do there. Are we that way religiously? Lord, I like this command. Well, Lord, I don't know about this part. Lord, I like the fact that I'm saved. I like the fact that this is a popular thing to do. But really, getting up Sunday at 9 o'clock, seriously? That's the Passover, right? That's the broccoli of Christianity for some people. Or, what give of my means? That's the broccoli which is there. And so you see, a lot of people view their relationship with Jesus in that way. It's a buffet bar, and you like him as Savior. You don't like him as Lord, which is there. So you come when it's convenient, and you don't need anything. If there's something in the Bible that you totally disagree with, something you don't like, you forget that point. There's a fella on Facebook. He used to be a minister over in Murray. He now preaches and works with the church in Mobile, Alabama. And he posts verses. Every day, a different verse of the Bible. He's done it for 3 years. Bless his heart, he posted, maybe it was Matthew 19:9, I think actually it was out of Luke, about marriage, divorce, and remarriage. And of course, guess what that did? All sorts of comments. And a lot of people said, you are so judgmental to pull that out. And other people said, well, that's what you believe, but looking at my life, I found it to be much different. And a lot of people have said, well, you shouldn't post such things like that around Christmas. And I read that, and I want to think in my mind, never argue on Facebook. Nobody wins, right? But you just think in my mind, you may think in my mind, we think in our minds, that's the words of Jesus. It's not some preacher or some Christian or some radical person. It's just the words of Jesus written right out there. And everybody's like, well, that's your opinion, or I don't like that part, or whatever else it may be. And a lot of that's what got me to thinking about putting this class together is we treat the church like a buffet bar. And there may be passages in the New Testament, yeah, we don't like that part, but we'll take other parts as well. There's some parts where we're like, hey, I don't want to give up my Wednesday nights, or I don't want to give up this time or whatever. And we want some parts, but we don't want other parts or whatever else it might be. Now, when you read the words of Jesus, he was pretty strong on this all or nothing concept. In John 6, he starts talking about eating of my flesh, drinking of my blood. Now, as Bible readers in John 6, we think immediately when you're eating flesh and drinking blood, we're talking about the Lord's Supper. And there's some religious groups who insist John 6 is Lord's Supper. It's not. Jesus has just fed the 5,000. And these 5,000 are saying, hey, we're going to make you king because you're feeding us. As long as you feed us, we'll make you king and follow you. And Jesus says, no, no, no. This is not about physical food. It's about spiritual food. And until you become disciples, you can't truly be right. He says, eat the flesh, drink the blood. That is to follow or consume Jesus and his teachings. Now, as they see that in John 6, the saddest verse of the Bible is John 6:6:6. Remember that number out of the book of Revelation? And sometimes we add all sorts of meaning to that. All 666 means is you don't measure up to God because God is 7. So the saddest verse of the Bible is John 6:6:6. Because you look at John 6 and verse 66, it says, and they decided no longer to follow Jesus. They went away after hearing these things. And that is such a sad verse. And Jesus, perhaps discouraged, looks to Peter and the rest of the apostles and says, are you also going to go? In John 6:68, Peter says, Lord, to whom else shall we go? For you have the words of life. In other words, Peter says, yes, I recognize this is a hard teaching, but there's nowhere else I can go to have this quality of life. There's nowhere else I can go to find salvation, so I'm here for it. And that should be our attitude as well. There may be an unpopular teaching. There may be something that we struggle with in our own life, and it hurts us when we hear it preached or taught about. But our commitment to Jesus needs to be so extreme that we follow God absolutely no matter what. Now let's talk about the breadcrumb church. You're on a soccer team. For some reason, soccer teams like to play Sundays, and cheerleading likes to happen Sunday. I think it's just because that's the free day for a lot of people. What happens if you're on a very good soccer team and you go up and tell the coach, hey, I'm going to come to practice and I'm going to play in the games as long as I don't have anything else going. But if something else comes up, if I don't really feel good that day, I'm just not going to be there. But I want to start on your team, and I want the uniform, and I want to play all the time. What's your soccer coach going to say? Bye-bye. Yeah. You know, you're at least going to be on the bench if you're even still on the team, right? Okay. What about at work? You're like, okay, boss, as long as I feel comfortable and get up on time, I'll show up. And as long as it's not too difficult, I'll be there. All right? If you have a regular boss, what happens? Huh? Yeah. You're out of there, right? Yeah, it's tough. So now we have the church, okay? And what happens to us on Sundays? I'm here as long as it's convenient and I don't have anything else happening. I'm going to come as long as what you ask me to do is really convenient and as long as I get a lot of positive comments about how people are impressed with what I've done. Do we breadcrumb church and say, oh, I want you here so badly that I'm not going to do anything to offend you? Or do we really create disciples and really work to help us be the church that Jesus intended for us to be? Now, that's harsh teaching. That's really harsh teaching. But I want us to see how we treat the church so differently than we do any sports team, so differently than we do any other aspect of what we have going on. Why do we place God second so often? And why is it that we follow God only if it's convenient? Most important thing you've done this week, be right here. And that's not just because you're listening to a preacher. That's probably lower on the thing. First of all, it's important you're here because it shows you love the Lord. But second of all, because you're encouraging that person that's right next to you. Church is not fun when there's only like 3 people there. But boy, you get in a building that's full, it just lifts you up. And that's why we need people to put God first. That's why we need people who are committed to the church, who are willing to work and be here. And so, covenant over comfort, what does your local church expect of its members? Yeah, I'm doing all right. What should it expect? Let's go ahead and look at the call to action. Why do you think today people are leery of committing to a congregation? Why do we leapfrog so much from one church to another church to another church? What's going on in our minds that cause us to do that? Right. There you go. Yeah.
It could also be because of cult fear, like
Okay.
if you join a church, they're going to be
They're going to,
gliding on you all
yes.
the time.
They're going to grab you in
If
and all
you
that sort of stuff.
all the false teachings
Mhm.
that you went through in the 90s.
Yeah, be careful about
really
that stuff.
killed the religious
It
belief.
did. It did. You're right. You're right. And we love something new. It's a little bit harder when it's not as new. We pass that honeymoon period. Okay? Some ways our relationship with Jesus is similar to a marriage, commitment which is there, the love and sacrifice that we have that's there. And what should churches require of its members? Church doesn't require any more than Jesus does. And so what I'm saying is in this class, don't breadcrumb Jesus. Don't give him just enough to keep him close. Don't give him just enough to make it where, okay, I'm a member there, but you can't ask anything more of me. Okay? All right, this is our 3-hour Sunday. So take this opportunity, walk around a little bit, get that blood flowing. All right, so through this 3rd hour, you're feeling good. I learned my lesson this morning. I've been here long enough to know better. But I got up this morning and thought, it would be really cool standing in front of that pulpit. That's what a real preacher would do. So I got up in front of that pulpit, and about point number 3, I realized those are heat lamps. It is very hot in here. And so I'm not standing there for the afternoon service. In fact, it feels like I'm in a refrigerator right now. I'm away from those lights. Yes. But so we're going to do it differently for Sunday night or Sunday afternoon or Sunday morning for the 3rd service. We're going to do it different. All right.